The story is titled, "They Checked His Cell Every Hour. He Still Disappeared Without a Trace." The flashlight beam hits your eyelids first. It's a physical weight, heavy and intrusive, piercing through the thin layer of sleep you've managed to scrape together. Then comes the metallic clack-clack of the heavy bolt sliding back, just enough for the viewing port to open. A grunt, a pause, the scratch of a pen on a clipboard. Then the darkness returns, but the sleep doesn't. That was the rhythm of my life at North Branch Correctional, every 60 minutes, 24 times a day. I wasn't a killer, I wasn't a gang leader. I was Elias Thorne, 44, male, a structural engineer who had applied his trade to the interior of a bank vault rather than a skyscraper. The state didn't like that I wouldn't tell them where the bonds were buried, so they put me in the special management unit. They called it administrative segregation for high-risk assets. We called it the kennel. It was designed to break you, to peel away the layers of your sanity until you were just a weeping raw nerve ready to trade a location for a decent night's sleep. When I first arrived, shuffling off the transport bus in leg irons that bit into my ankles, the air smelled like burning dust and industrial bleach. It's a smell that coats the back of your throat and never leaves. I remember looking up at the gray slab of the facility. No windows, just vents. It looked less like a prison and more like a tomb that hadn't been sealed yet. Processing was a blur of humiliation. You learn quickly that your body isn't yours anymore. It belongs to the Department of Corrections. They strip you, search you, spread you, cough. They take your clothes, your name, and give you a number and a jumpsuit that smells like 3 other men's sweat. The guard who processed me was Officer Griggs, 52, male, a man with a face like a clenched fist and eyes that had seen too much human misery to care about mine. He tossed my jumpsuit at me without looking. "Don't get comfortable, Thorne," Griggs muttered, checking a box on his tablet. "SMU is where the ghosts live. You breathe when we tell you. You eat when we tell you. You sleep when we let you." He wasn't lying. My cell was 6 by 9, poured concrete. The bed was a steel slab bolted to the wall with a thin mattress that offered as much comfort as a folded towel. The toilet and sink were a single stainless steel unit, cold to the touch. But the worst part wasn't the furniture. It was the door, solid steel, heavy, with that damn viewing slot. Because of the high flight risk designation, they put me on the hourly watch. At first you think you can handle it. You think, it's just a check. But time works differently inside a box. The first week, I paced. 3 steps forward, turn, 3 steps back. My socks wore thin on the rough concrete. I counted the rivets in the doorframe, 42. I counted the cracks in the ceiling, 7. I tried to sleep in shifts, catching 40 minutes here, 20 there, but the anticipation of the next check became worse than the check itself. Your body learns to spike its adrenaline at minute 55. You lay there, heart hammering, waiting for the light. Panic sets in around day 10. You start to feel the walls physically pressing in. The silence is heavy, broken only by the distant, echoing screams of men losing their minds in other cells, or the dull thud of a body hitting a door. I started talking to myself just to hear a voice that wasn't screaming. I replayed memories, the taste of black coffee, the sound of rain on a tin roof, the smell of my wife's hair. But the prison eats those too. Eventually the memories turn gray, like old photographs left in the sun. I realized that if I fought the routine, I would die in there. Maybe not physically, but Elias Thorne would vanish, replaced by a drooling husk. The system relied on resistance. It expected me to rattle the bars, to scream at the guards, to beg. That's what Griggs wanted. That's what the warden wanted. They wanted me to expend my energy fighting the immovable object. So I stopped. About 3 weeks in, I sat on the edge of my bunk, hands folded, staring at the steel door. I stopped pacing. I stopped cursing the flashlight. Instead, I started watching back. I treated the hourly check not as torture, but as data. I learned the rotation. Officer Miller, 28, male, the younger guard on the night shift, walked with a heavy heel strike. I could hear him coming from 3 cells away. He was lazy. He checked at minute 58, flashed the light for exactly 2 seconds, and moved on. Griggs was different. He was silent, sneaky. He'd arrive at the top of the hour, sometimes wait outside the door for 10 seconds just to see if I moved, then hit the light. He wanted to catch me doing something. Anything. The cell wasn't a cage anymore. It was a puzzle box. And the hourly check wasn't a constraint. It was the only clock I had. I began to synchronize my breathing with the rotation of the guards. I learned to sleep with my eyes open, or at least look like I was awake when I was drifting. One night Miller flashed his light. I didn't flinch. I just stared at the wall. "Freak," I heard him whisper before the heavy footsteps receded. He didn't know it, but he had just given me the first piece of the key. They thought they were watching a prisoner in a box. They didn't realize they were locking themselves in with an engineer who had nothing but time to dismantle their machine. Screw by screw. The walls were thick, sure, but every structure has a load-bearing limit, a stress point. I just had to find where the cracks were, and I knew they wouldn't be in the concrete. They would be in the men holding the flashlights. Routine becomes a narcotic. If you let it, the repetition numbs you to the horror. Wake up, count the rivets. Eat the slop tray slid through the slot, usually Nutriloaf, a dense, flavorless brick of ground meat, vegetables, and cardboard that sits in your stomach like lead. Wait for the click of the lock. Wait for the flashlight. Wait for the silence. But for me, the routine was a map. I spent the next 2 months mapping the invisible architecture of the North Branch SMU. I wasn't just watching the guards anymore. I was studying the building's circulatory system. I listened to the pipes groan behind the concrete. I felt the subtle vibration in the floor when the heavy HVAC units kicked on in the basement. As an engineer, I knew that every building moves, every building breathes, and every building has a void, space that exists solely to service the structure, spaces where no human is supposed to go. My world expanded by exactly 4 inches the day I met Marcus Shelby, 30 male. Shelby was a trustee, one of the few general population inmates allowed into the SMU to mop the corridors and collect trash. He was a skinny kid with nervous energy and tattoos climbing up his neck like ivy. He wasn't a killer. He was a thief who'd gotten good at navigating the prison economy. I timed it perfectly. It was Miller's shift, the lazy shift. Miller was down the hall flirting with the control booth officer over the intercom. Shelby slid his mop bucket near my door. "You the bank guy?" Shelby whispered, not breaking the rhythm of his mopping. The sound of wet strings slapping the concrete masked his voice. I was sitting on the floor, my back to the door, talking to the air as if I were crazy. It was a good cover. "I'm the guy who knows how things are built, Shelby, and how they fall apart. Griggs says you're buried in here. Says they threw away the key." "Griggs talks too much," I murmured. "I need something. A distinct item. Acetone or high-strength acid cleaner. Whatever they use to strip the wax off these floors." Shelby scoffed, a soft hiss. "You crazy? That's contraband level 1. I get caught with that, I'm in the cell next to you." "I don't need the bottle. I need a soaked rag. Wrapped in plastic. Shove it in the bottom of the trash bag when you collect my tray. Do it, and I'll tell you how to bypass the electrical lock on the canteen storage door. I saw the schematics for this unit type years ago. It's a solenoid flaw." Silence. Just the swish, swish of the mop. Then, "Tomorrow." It was a gamble. Trust in prison is lighter than air and just as hard to hold. But Shelby was greedy, and greed is predictable. 2 days later, buried under a half-eaten brick of Nutriloaf, I found a small, tightly wrapped ball of saran wrap. Inside was a piece of gray uniform cloth soaked in industrial solvent. The smell was sharp, chemical, intoxicating. It smelled like progress. I went to work on the toilet. In these cells, the toilet and sink are a single, heavy stainless steel unit bolted to the wall. Behind it is the pipe chase, a narrow utility corridor running the length of the cell block, filled with plumbing and electrical conduits. It's the artery of the prison. The unit was held in place by 4 tamper-proof security bolts. To the naked eye, they were immovable, but the concrete around the lower left bolt was dark, stained. I had heard a drip, a slow, rhythmic plip, plip, plip from behind the wall that only happened when the neighbor flushed. A leak. Water is the enemy of structure. Give it enough time, and water will cut through a mountain. Here it had been quietly rotting the concrete around the anchor bolt for years. Every night during the 4-hour window when Miller was on duty, between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., when the prison hum was lowest, I worked. I used the acetone rag to soften the decades of caulking and paint around the fixture. It was slow, agonizing work. My fingers bled, my nails cracked. I made a tool out of the stiff plastic handle of my toothbrush, melted down by friction and reshaped against the rough floor into a crude shiv, which I used to pick away the softened mortar. The hourly checks were the metronome of my labor. 2 a.m. Miller walks by. Flash. Step. Step. Gone. 2:01 a.m. I slide off the bunk, dampen the rag, and apply it to the bolt. I scratch at the mortar for 50 minutes. 2:55 a.m. I clean up the dust, mix it with a bit of wet toilet paper and toothpaste to create a fake paste, and fill the holes back in. I rub dirt from the floor over it to match the grime. 2:59 a.m. I am back in bed, hands visible, breathing slow. 3:00 a.m. Miller walks by. Flash. It took 3 months to loosen the first bolt, but the real turning point wasn't the bolt. It was the night Griggs almost caught me. It was 3:45 a.m. I was complacent. Miller was usually asleep in the booth at this hour, or watching movies on a contraband phone. I was deep in the work, my arm wedged behind the steel fixture, feeling the threads of the bolt give way. The metal groaned, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. Suddenly, the heavy steel door to the block clanged open. Not Miller's shuffle. Hard, purposeful boots. Griggs. He wasn't due for a check. He was hunting. I scrambled. I had seconds. I shoved the toothbrush shank into my mattress. I kicked the dust under the bed. But I couldn't reseal the caulking in time. The gap around the fixture was visible, a jagged black line against the gray wall. If he looked closely, it was over. The footsteps stopped at my door. The viewing port slid open. No flashlight this time, just his eyes staring into the gloom. I lay on the bunk, freezing my muscles. I didn't feign sleep. I stared right back at the slot, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he could hear it. "Thorne," Griggs whispered. His voice was like grinding stones. "You look comfortable." He knew, or he suspected. He was sniffing the air, sensing the tension. "Just dreaming, boss," I rasped, my voice dry. "Dreaming is dangerous," Griggs said. "Dreams make you sloppy." He stood there for a full minute. I saw the beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping the cell. It hit the floor. It hit the sink. It lingered on the edge of the toilet unit. My breath caught in my throat. The gap was there. A shadow. A flaw. Then the light snapped off. "Enjoy the night," Griggs said. The port slammed shut. I didn't move for an hour. I pissed myself right there in the bunk, the warmth turning cold against my skin. He hadn't seen it. Or maybe he had, and he was just waiting to see what I'd do next. That terror didn't stop me. It clarified things. I realized I couldn't just loosen the bolts. I needed to disappear before I actually left. I needed a way to be in the cell when I wasn't in the cell. The next day, I began saving the paper from the Neutraloaf wrappers. I started collecting hair from the barbershop clippings Shelby swept up, trading him my fruit cup for the trash. I needed a head. I needed a body. Because once that toilet came off the wall, I was going into the walls. And when Miller looked in at 3 a.m., he needed to see Elias Thorne sleeping. The plan wasn't just an escape anymore. It was a vanishing act. And the theater was open. Creation is a messy, desperate business. I named him the Sleeper. He was made of chewed newspaper pulp mixed with water and the starch from the Neutraloaf, molded over a bundle of dirty laundry I'd siphoned from the cart Shelby left unguarded for 30 seconds a week. His hair was a patchwork of floor sweepings, glued on with a paste made from crushed sugar packets and saliva. In the harsh fluorescent light of day, he looked like a grotesque, lumpy monster. But in the dim amber glow of the security lights, under a gray wool blanket, he looked exactly like a broken man curled in the fetal position. The dummy was the easy part. The physics of the wall was the nightmare. By the 4th month, the mortar around the heavy stainless steel combination unit was dust. The bolts were loose. The only thing holding the fixture to the wall was gravity and a single rusted waist coupling I hadn't dared to wrench free yet. The plan relied on the gap in the system. The pipe chase. Behind the cells of Block C ran a 3-foot-wide vertical utility shaft, a throat of concrete and steel that housed the plumbing, electrical conduits, and ventilation ducts. It was the spine of the building. If I could get into the spine, I could climb to the head, the roof, or down to the bowels, the steam tunnels. I chose up. The steam tunnels were patrolled. The roof was trusted to be impregnable. The night I finally moved the unit, my hands were shaking so bad I thought I'd dropped the wrench I'd fashioned from a stolen metal bracket. It was 2:05 a.m. Miller had just done his rounds, his heavy boots fading down the corridor. I gripped the cold steel of the sink. I pulled. With a sickening shuck sound, the heavy unit slid forward on the floor. The seal broke. The smell hit me instantly. A blast of stale, humid air from the chase, smelling of raw sewage, damp rot, and rust. It was the sweetest thing I'd ever smelled. It was the smell of the outside, or at least, the not here. I squeezed through the gap. The chase was a vertical coffin. Cables snaked like black vines around rusting iron pipes. The darkness was absolute, save for the slivers of light bleeding in from the cracks of other cells above and below. I could hear the prison dreaming, the murmurs, the snores, the flushing toilets echoing through the pipes like thunder. I didn't have much time. 53 minutes until Miller came back. I began to climb. I braced my back against the concrete wall and my feet against the pipes, inching up the shaft. It was grueling. The pipes were slick with condensation and grime. My muscles, atrophied from months of confinement, screamed. My skin scraped raw against the rough masonry. I made it up 2 levels, past the cells on the second tier. I found what I was looking for, the HVAC intake duct. It was a massive galvanized steel box that pulled air from the chase and vented it to the roof units. If I could cut through the mesh screen, I could crawl inside the ductwork. But that night, the building fought back. I was 20 feet up, wedged between a hot water pipe and the wall, when my foot slipped on a patch of slime. I slid. I scrambled for a grip, my fingers tearing against a conduit bracket. I slammed my shoulder into a junction box, the metal clang reverberating through the shaft like a gunshot. I froze. The sound echoed up and down the void. Below me, a light flickered. A voice. What the hell was that? It wasn't Miller. It was Griggs. He was on the block. He wasn't supposed to be there. Panic is a cold spike in the chest. I was trapped in the wall 20 feet up, with my cell empty below, and the toilet unit pulled out, leaving a gaping hole in the security of the SMU. If Griggs checked my cell, it was over. I heard the heavy clank of the tier door opening. Boots on the walkway. Fast. Aggressive. I couldn't go down fast enough. If I slid, the noise would give me away. If I climbed down slowly, he'd be at my cell before I could pull the fixture back. I stayed put. I had no choice. I pressed my face against a crack in the masonry, looking down into the shaft toward the level of my cell. The light from my own cell spilled into the chase, illuminating the back of the toilet unit I had pushed out. Through the gap, I heard the bolt of my cell door slide back. Clack, clack. My heart stopped. He wasn't just looking through the window. He was coming in. "Thorne!" Griggs' voice boomed, muffled by the concrete but unmistakable. I closed my eyes. The sleeper. I had left him in the bunk, curled tight, the blanket pulled up to the ear. I heard the bed frame creak. Griggs had kicked the bunk. "Wake up, engineer." Silence. I heard a bang, Thorne. "Don't play games." I imagined him standing over the papier-mâché lump. I imagined the beam of his heavy maglite tracing the curve of the fake spine, the texture of the hair. One touch, one poke with a baton, and the crust would crack, revealing the trash inside. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The air in the chase grew hot, suffocating. "Heavy sleeper tonight," Griggs muttered. I heard the rustle of fabric. Was he pulling the blanket? Then a static burst from his radio. "Control to Griggs. We got a sensor trip in the loading dock. Need eyes." A pause that lasted a lifetime. "Copy," Griggs said. "Probably a rat. On my way." He didn't touch the body. He didn't check the toilet. He turned. The boots retreated. The door slammed shut. The bolt slid home. I didn't exhale. I couldn't. I slid down the pipes, my skin tearing, indifferent to the pain. I squeezed back into my cell, pulled the heavy steel unit back against the wall, and repacked the gap with the gray paste I kept in my cheek. I collapsed onto the floor, shaking uncontrollably, staring at the sleeper. He had saved my life. But as I laid there, listening to the blood roar in my ears, I realized something. Griggs hadn't left because of the radio call. That was luck. And luck runs out. He had kicked the bed. He had been inches away. He knew something was wrong. The air in the cell felt different when the toilet was pulled out. The draft was noticeable. He felt it. He wasn't going to arrest me. He was going to wait. He was going to let me think I got away with it, and then he was going to catch me in the act. He wanted the hunt. I looked at my hands covered in grease and brick dust. I looked at the calendar I scratched into the wall. I couldn't wait for the perfect moonless night. I couldn't wait to map the roof sensors. The timeline had collapsed. I had to go tonight. I looked at the dummy. "You're taking the fall, buddy," I whispered. The next hour Miller would check. But the hour after that, the cell would be empty, and Elias Thorne would be nothing but a ghost in the ventilation system. I stripped off my uniform. I greased my shoulders with the packet of margarine I'd saved from dinner. I took a deep breath of the stale prison air. The last one, I hoped. I wasn't ready, but the building was hungry, and I was done being the meal. The crawl through the HVAC duct was a birth canal made of galvanized steel and razor-sharp screws. It was pitch black, the air thick with decades of recirculated dust and the metallic tang of ozone. I had to dislocate my shoulder to squeeze past the initial intake damper. I felt the pop, a sickening wet crunch that echoed in the helmet of my own skull, followed by a wave of nausea. But pain belongs to the living, and inside that vent, I was neither dead nor alive. I was just movement. I dragged myself forward by my elbows, counting the rivets with my fingers to keep the panic at bay. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. 4, 5, 6. Don't scream. Below me, the prison hummed. I checked the glow-in-the-dark face of the cheap plastic watch I'd bartered from Shelby. 3:58 a.m. Miller would be walking down the tier in 2 minutes. He would look into cell 402. He would see the gray lump of the sleeper under the blanket. He would see the toilet bolted to the wall, held there only by a tenuous gum of gray paste and the tension of the plumbing pipes I hadn't fully disconnected. If he looked too hard, if he saw the shadow gap, it was over. I stopped moving. I lay flat in the duct, holding my breath, imagining the beam of the flashlight hitting the dummy. 3:59 a.m., 4 a.m., 4:01 a.m. No sirens, no shouting, just the relentless, indifferent hum of the ventilation fans. Miller had walked on. I had bought another hour of life. I reached the roof exhaust unit 10 minutes later. The fan blade was a massive stationary guillotine. I'd timed my exit for the system's auto-cycle flush, a 90-second window where the fans cut power to reverse direction. I squeezed between the blades, the grease slick against my skin, and pushed the service hatch open. The air that hit me wasn't sweet. It was freezing, biting, and smelled of wet asphalt, but it was outside air. I rolled onto the gravel roof of the SMU. The sky was a vast, terrifying void. After months in a box, the lack of a ceiling gave me vertigo. I wanted to claw at the ground, to hold on to something solid. I crawled on my belly toward the edge. The perimeter lights created a moat of artificial daylight around the building, blindingly bright. Towers 3 and 4 scanned the yard. But I knew the blind spot. As a structural engineer, I knew that the drainage scuppers on the northeast corner created a shadow where the floodlights couldn't reach, shielded by the overhang of the generator housing. I looked down. 40 feet of smooth concrete. I didn't have a rope. I didn't have a sheet. I had the lightning protection cable, a braided copper wire, thick as a thumb, anchored to the parapet and running down the side of the wall to the grounding rod in the earth. It wasn't a ladder. It was a fire pole made of sandpaper. I wrapped my jumpsuit jacket around my hands, gripped the cable, and stepped off the ledge. Gravity took me. I tried to brake, to squeeze the cable with my boots, but the grease from the vent made me slick. I plummeted, the copper wire tearing through the jacket, shredding the skin on my palms. I hit the mud with a bone-jarring thud that snapped my teeth together. I lay in the shadow of the wall, gasping, waiting for the dogs. My hands were hamburger meat. My shoulder was screaming. Nothing. Just the wind. I was in the no-man's land between the SMU and the outer perimeter fence. This was the part Griggs said was impossible. But Griggs didn't know about the drainage culvert. The prison was built on a swamp. The water had to go somewhere. I found the grate in the muddy ditch. It was welded shut. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I pulled at the bars. Solid. I had accounted for bolts, for locks, but not a weld. I was trapped between the wall and the fence, exposed. Then I remembered the vibrations, the pipes in the chase, the shifting ground. I dug my heels into the mud and kicked the concrete casing around the grate, not the grate itself. The earth here was soft, marshy. The concrete anchor was old. On the third kick, the soil gave way. The entire grate frame shifted in the mud, just enough to create a gap underneath. I didn't crawl. I slithered, forcing my body into the muck, the freezing sludge filling my nose, my mouth. I pushed through the pipe, under the electric fence, under the patrol road. When I surfaced on the other side, half a mile into the state forest, I didn't run. I couldn't. I limped. I walked until the sun came up, until the prison was just a gray smudge on the horizon. They say I disappeared without a trace. I read the news clippings in a library 3 states away. 6 months later. Manhunt suspended for escaped engineer. They found the sleeper at the 6 a.m. count. Griggs had torn the cell apart. They said he smashed the dummy's head against the wall until it disintegrated in a wet newspaper. They searched the woods. They searched the roads. But they never found a track. The swamp had swallowed my footprints. The rain had washed away my scent. I am free. That's what the word is, right? But I don't sleep. I live in a small room in a boarding house near the rail yards in Ohio. I pay cash. I work construction under the table, fixing foundations. I keep to myself. Every night I wake up at exactly 58 minutes past the hour. My heart hammers against my ribs. I stare at the door, waiting for the bolt to slide back, waiting for the flashlight. Sometimes when the wind blows right, I can still smell the bleach. Freedom didn't give me my life back. It just gave me a bigger cell. I walk down the street and I calculate the load-bearing capacity of the bridges I cross. I check the exits in every diner. I look at the faces of passing police officers, searching for Griggs' eyes. I escaped North Branch. I beat the concrete. I beat the system. But the silence, the isolation, I brought that with me. I sit on the edge of my bed, watching the clock tick toward the hour. Clack, clack. It's just the radiator settling. I know that, but I still pull the blanket up, curl into a ball, and pretend to be asleep. Just in case.